Hello, Covenant Keepers, and welcome back to another episode. We're so happy to have you with us. Babe, how you doing today?
I'm doing super spectacular.
Super fantabulous.
Blessed and highly flavored.
Guys, we're so happy that you're with us, and today we're going to be kind of doing a continuation of our last episode. If you haven't checked it, please go check it out. The last one was asking a question, basically, is your marriage and family being the light in a dark world? And as we were going through that podcast and we're talking and discussion, it opened up so many different conversations for us as a couple, just making us think. And one particular topic that keeps coming up, it has to do with pornography. And specifically, as we're talking to our Christian brothers and sisters, is there a place for pornography in the Christian marriage? Well, I know that sounds crazy just even asking that question. Mm-hmm. But we hear it as we sit with couples.
We do. We hear people that have, like, that has been normalized. Like, it's okay. Mm. You know, if you're watching porn together as a couple.
As long as you're doing it together.
Right. Well, I mean, there's even still an issue with certain cultures saying that it's okay for men to watch porn and men to look at other women because that's just the way men are.
Yes.
That is so twisted to me. And I talked a little bit about it in the last podcast about growing up and, you know, being raised in that lie. But it's so twisted that even now, many, many, many years later, from when I was being raised in that culture thinking that it's okay, that people still think it's okay. Some people still think, a big majority, still think it's okay that's just part of a man.
Well, what I see and what we've seen as we've sat and talked with couples is people are not openly.
They're not comfortable.
Nobody's talking about sex.
Yeah, they're not. They like shy away as soon as somebody starts talking about sex. It's like no. We're not talking about that.
Well, let me take
private.
this back, especially in the church. In the church, you say sex, and people start to cringe.
Yeah, they start to move around a little bit.
They get uncomfortable. You can physically see someone uncomfortable discussing it. Like, oh no, not in the house of the Lord. We cannot discuss sex here. This is a place meant behind closed doors, right? Blocked off between the husband and the wife. You shouldn't talk about it. But the problem that we've seen with many couples, even in the Christian church, the husband and the wife can't have a conversation about sex.
Yeah, people are scared to talk about sex. And that's one of the areas that marriage is struggling. Like, we see couples afraid to talk about sex with each other. They don't know how to. Mm-hmm. Some of them don't even know how to bring it up because they do think, oh, that's private. Like, if I speak to my husband or if I speak to my wife about what I'm thinking about as far as sex, they might reject me or they might think something's wrong with me, that I'm weird. So people just stay away from talking about it altogether. And then it goes further down the line to their kids. Like, they're afraid to talk to their kids about what healthy sexuality is all about.
Well, how can you? If I can't even talk openly to anyone or discuss anything openly to anyone, I can't discuss it with my wife, I for sure am not going to try to talk to my kids about it.
No, and I don't mean, we're not talking about just going out and discussing details about your sex life with your buddies or with a community of, people that you hang out with. That's not what we mean. And I think that's why some people, like, they don't even want to bring up the topic. It's not about talking about the details of your sex life with other people. Mm-hmm. It's about understanding what healthy sexuality is in marriage and how it is okay for husband and wife to talk to each other about what they like, what they don't like, what makes them uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot to be said about sex in the Bible.
Well, the thing is, right, and we've clarified, like, people aren't talking about it. Mm-hmm. Now, this is, for the whole. I'm not saying that there's absolutely no one, but for the big part, they're not talking about it in couples that we see. So if they're not talking about it, the church is not talking about it, right? Mm-hmm. You as a person, an individual, sure are not talking about it. Who's talking about it? Because someone is.
Well, you're getting some information from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Your information's coming from somewhere. Your ideas about sex are coming from somewhere.
Yes.
Whether they be from movies you watch, shows you watch,
Music you listen
to,
the people around you.
The social media feeds that you have. Like, you're being taught something. And more than likely, if you're not willing to talk about it and understand what the healthy sexuality is, your kids don't get it either. And you're allowing somebody else to teach them. And more than likely, it's not in the right way or in the right context.
It's definitely going to be a very distorted view of what God's design for sex is, right? And that's where it's going to come down to healthy sexuality. What does that look like? Like, where does that come from? What's going to be your baseline to decide where even healthy sexuality began? Because let's think about it. For most individuals, why we feel uncomfortable about it, why we don't discuss it, if you were actually to stop and think about it and ask yourself the question, where was the first time I remember ever being introduced to sex? Right? As a kid, how old were you? Who was the person that was introducing that to you? Because that is going to be a big factor in what kind of distortions you have of sexuality.
Well, in the way that you either hide the conversation about sex or openly talk about it. And that's what I mean, like with husband and wife, like that fear, like you're saying, where is that fear coming from? Because it's going to affect your sex life in your marriage.
Well, and I do, and I want to give a real life example here because I think people can relate to it. I myself learned about sex when I was very young. I don't even remember, like, extremely young. I'm thinking somewhere maybe between 5 and 7, maybe, if I can remember that far back. And it was introduced by another kid in my family. And I believe the first thing I remember seeing was back in the day when they had either magazines or something along those lines. And it was a picture of a nude woman. And that whole arena and circle was like, it was hidden. It wasn't something like we had out on the living room floor. It was behind, hidden. It was a secret. We don't talk about it, right? And it starts to develop that idea of what sex is. Right there from the beginning, I was taught you got to hide it. You don't share, you don't talk about it, right? And that began my training of what sexuality was. And then it grew from there, because at that moment in my personal life, now the door had been opened. Something had been opened in my young mind that now the spark, the wick was lit, and now I want to know more about this.
I really just got this picture in my mind of a dark room where people develop pictures. So in that place where you were at, this dark place you were at, it was developing pictures already.
Of course.
For your future. So now you have to somehow figure out a way to reverse that. Right? Because now you have these pictures that you can't get rid of them, right? Because they're developed already, they're in your mind, they don't go away. So now you have to combat this with, I believe, the truth. What God says that sexuality is supposed to be. What is sex supposed to be? And the only way you know what it's supposed to be, what that standard should be, is by reading what God says about it. Because he's got a lot to say about sex. He was the creator of sex between husband and wife.
He is. And that's the design and plan. But from that moment when I was taught that, what was the next step that I went to?
Or probably escalated, I'm assuming. Right?
100% it escalated. And even being a young kid, I discovered where I could find something to meet that growing and desire need I had inside of me. And I don't know how, but we become like little detectives. And you start seeking out and finding stuff. And because of the people that are around you, you find where these little things are at. Even back in the day when you could go to, when I was growing up, you could actually go to like a store and they would have a section. I don't know if you remember, this may be too old for you. They would have a section of what they used to call nudie magazines, but they were covered.
Yeah.
But there would be like a section of this in the store. This is back in the day. And you would have to go in that store and, you would be secretive about looking around and finding stuff. But you still found a way to meet that thing. And then as you got older, it went into the movies and to the other stuff. And so it built. So by the time that I was in a relationship,
you had all kinds of distorted views.
My gosh, man, I had no clue. The clue that I had what I thought sex was supposed to look like, now that I know what God's design is, it was 180 degrees. Let me tell you, I was going in one direction and God was in another.
Well, the scary part of that is that how you're talking about, like you went and sought it out.
Oh, yeah.
The kids don't have to seek it out now because they're literally in the palm of their hands if the parents are not careful with the device and what filters and what parameters and restrictions they're putting on those devices. Like, your kids are literally, like, have easy access to the whole world in the palm of their hands. So it's pretty scary if you, first of all, if you're not talking about it as husband and wife, what your kids are going through and what they're thinking and what's being put in their minds already.
So let's take a break, because I want to dive deeper into, like in my own example. I mean there's many other different examples, but how that affected sex and sexuality and the relationship from what I was taught and brought into it. So let's take a break and come back and dive deeper into that. Are you looking to strengthen your marriage? Are there reoccurring conflicts that continue to frustrate both you and your spouse? And could you benefit from faith-based solutions for today's relationship issues? At Tampa Family Resources, that's exactly what we offer. Check out our website today, tampafamilyresources.com. Hey guys, it's Brent and Lucy from Covenant Keepers. And if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. It will cost you no money out of pocket. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. The cool thing about it is that Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard from Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so many more. It's so easy, and everything you need to make a podcast you can find in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm, that's ANCHOR.FM, to get started today. So guys, thanks for staying with us. And before we took the break, we were talking about sex and sexuality and the development of your idea of what that's supposed to look like in your marriage and your relationship. And I know this is one of those topics that people, maybe you've never heard it before, maybe you have, but everybody has a story, and you came up with an idea of what it was supposed to look like. Now, taking my past and coming into a relationship and how it affects now, because I'm faced with my spouse, and she came with her own idea of what sex and sexuality should look like, and it may look very different than mine. What if that lady or woman, she was introduced by a trauma? So sex wasn't, this desire, this burning yearning that she had inside her, but it was a hurt. It was a pain. It was scary.
Yeah, that definitely creates quite a bit of conflict in marriage when you come from two different backgrounds like that. Like you have, let's just say the husband's coming with all these expectations and desires when it comes to sex, but the wife is coming with, I really could care less if we go into the area of sex because I've been hurt and I really don't want to.
Well, you think about it, that old song, that two worlds collide. This is literally two worlds colliding, right? Because and this is a fictional story, but, on our wedding night, where that husband that came with the history that I described, and that wife came with the history that she described, and on our wedding night...
On their wedding night.
I'm sorry, on their wedding night, it's not us, but on a wedding night, these two worlds collide. He's got his expectation and ideas of what this is going to look like, because he's been trained through pornography.
Well, he's been trained. They've both been trained in some kind of way, but nobody's talked about it before the wedding night either.
But just think about that.
Yeah.
right? He doesn't know how to lean into his wife like that. He's got no clue how to talk and discuss that. So the first encounter they even have is, let's just say, a big fail.
Well, and this is you assuming that they're waiting till their wedding night to have sex.
Well, I'm trying to put it from a Christian perspective, right? But go.
Because you know,
right.
And I know that here in the world we live in, a lot of couples are not waiting to have sex on their wedding night.
True.
They're doing it beforehand, but even so, beforehand, nobody's really talking about their hurts and pains, their, the expectations and what they've seen and what they're expecting from their spouse.
Well, you're not going to talk about it. I mean, because just that story I described of you of my past, I was ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
I was ashamed from what I'd done because I knew it was wrong. And bringing it back around to pornography, how many people struggle with pornography? And I guess it's got a hold on them in their life.
Mm.
And because we don't talk about sex, I'm sure not going to share with you how this has a hold on me. So I continue to dabble in it behind closed doors or in hiding. Thinking about how that's going to affect a relationship, and specifically a marriage, and what that does.
Yeah, it definitely messes some stuff up for some folks, as we've seen, with some couples. But I guess what's the fix, right? How do you find a solution?
Well, I think even to begin, you have to realize, again, because we all have a distorted view of life in general. We have a distorted view of what sex is in general until you find the truth about it. So you even have to seek the truth in this area of sex and sexuality. So where are you going to find your truth? As Christians, we need to go to the Bible. We need to go to the Bible to find the truth about sex. Because if you're going outside, right, if you're going to your friends, you're getting a distorted view of a distorted view of a distorted view, and it goes on and it goes on and it goes on.
Well, it's interesting too, because even in some Christian circles, like they're training their minds to watch things and listen to things that they're talking to other Christians about. And as we know, a lot of people kind of get into that follower mentality, like, well, if they're doing it and they're, we see them at church every week and they seem to be good Christians, like it's okay for us to, watch some of this stuff. And and then that gets perpetrated amongst communities of people.
The believers, yes.
To where now the believers are being deceived into thinking, hey, it's okay to, dabble in this and that, because we're still going to church every week.
You know what made me think of an example there, and I'm sure probably anyone that's listening to this has probably ran across it. 50 Shades of Grey. That was a big thing a couple of years back.
That was a big thing, yeah, that we heard about.
They had the books, then they had the movies, and even in the Christian circle, this was a big thing. Like people were talking about, hey, this is awesome, you need to check it out. And like you said, that opened the door to people that maybe were not introduced to it. It cracked the door to begin to start massaging some of those distorted beliefs about what sex and sexuality and relationships should be and look like.
Well, that's the world that we live in, right? Everything becomes over-sexualized. Like that is one of those things, sex, right? That God put in us. That depending on what road you take from early on is going to be the framework of what happens to you in the future. And so now it's okay to introduce things like the 50 Shades of Grey. Like we never watched them or read the books or anything, but there was so much hype and talk about it.
There was a lot of write-ups on it.
And write-ups on it. That it was like, whoa, like how is this become okay? How has this become the norm? Well,
being in the area that we're in, we had to do the research to be aware, to know what it is, right? To get an understanding, to be able to talk to people about it. And because some people may not even, okay, let's talk about not knowing, right? I once was blind.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not even aware how something like that book or those movies are affecting them as they view it. Like, they may not even think it's bad. Like, oh, this is not...
Well, that's what it is. That
what about this?
It's a deception nobody thinks is going to hurt them.
A lot of people looked at that book. This is not pornography.
Right.
This is not pornography.
Well, because it was mostly geared toward women.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it was women going after this.
Mm-hmm.
So with the write-ups and everything that, we were seeing from people reviewing it or whatever, like, you could see how a woman who's married to somebody, their sex life may not be so great, right? They're reading this stuff, watching the movie, already gaining a perspective of what, comparing, I guess, husband to this character in this movie, maybe we should be doing something different. Like, this isn't, like, my marriage is so boring and it's not as exciting.
Well, thinking about that is fantasy, right?
That's exactly.
Fantasy versus reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the world has taken sex and sexuality. It's all about fantasy,
mm-hmm.
right? Look at what's pleasing to the eye.
Right.
What's desirable. Like you said, in comparing to one another, that's the same thing with pornography. I know for a lot of men that struggle with, they get this idea and image in their mind of what a woman should be like, what a woman should act like, what she should do, how she should respond to the touch. And then you get with your wife, and she doesn't respond that way. She doesn't act that way. She doesn't talk that way.
So then the men start thinking there's something wrong, and that they should go find a woman that is going to look this way, act this way, respond this way, because the wife is just not cutting it.
She's default.
Well, and where does that come from? Now that comes from the drug that is pornography, because it basically kind of almost numbs you to the real thing.
Well, yeah.
And your desire is only heightened and made better only through watching the pornography and this fictitious fantasy world that you have immersed yourself in. It's so scary.
It's very scary because, like, we always talk about sin being so crafty and kind of camouflage and not really see, because you may think that reading a book is not pornography. You may be thinking watching images on the screen or not. It's not really doing anything. It's just, I'm just watching something, but not realizing what it's doing to you as a man or as a woman. Psychologically. Well, okay, let's take it back to the Bible. What does Jesus say is adultery? It doesn't say you physically have to have a physical act to commit adultery. He says it happens in your mind.
A thought, just having a thought.
The thought, a lustful thought in your mind. So if you're a woman and you're watching or reading these things that's causing lustful thoughts.
A woman or a man.
Well, I'm saying that, but I was going to flip it to the pornography for the man, because men are more visual. Women are emotional, so they can go through and read and become emotionally lust. But men, they're visual, so they're looking at stuff. They're looking at a screen. They're watching a woman across the room.
And David and Bathsheba?
Yeah, the woman on the rooftop. He gets so focused and allured by her beauty. He's sucked in by the sin and the desires of his heart.
That leads him to commit murder.
Well, that sin lead to sin lead to sin.
Right.
And he's on the downfall of that.
And the rest of his family, generations to come, is affected by this one decision that he made. And that's right there. That's the sin that leads to death, right? Because we talk about all sin leads to death. That's what the Bible says.
Yes.
Where this type of temptation, so crafty that people are like, oh, it's just a movie. Oh, this is just a book. This isn't doing anything. That's how they excuse it.
Or what about, hey, we watch these types of movies because it sparks up our sex life in the bedroom.
That is the scariest thing right there, because we hear that even from Christian couples. But hello, do you know what it's doing to you guys psychologically? Because eventually, guess what? Eventually, like, you won't be able to just have sex as husband and wife just because you have the desire. No, because now the desire has to be sparked by watching something.
Because it grows and it builds.
Yeah, it builds. So now it's not like you guys are just not enough. Like it's just not enough.
Well, thinking about what it does from a man on a psychological standpoint, like there's physical ramifications from watching pornography. There just is. Well, it's been proven by science. And the same thing, let's talk about the woman and the emotional effects.
Well, hold on, because it's not just physical. That's physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. Well, there is a brokenness that happens on many levels within the human being. For both the man and the woman. It happens differently because the way a woman is designed is different than a man.
Right.
But in all those elements, psychologically, physically, emotionally, spiritually, there's a brokenness that happens.
It is. And it's subtle, right? Because you don't recognize it in the beginning. And you don't think this is not really going to hurt my relationship. This is not really going to cause death. I mean, it's nothing more than a book or a picture, but not realizing the ramifications from going down that path. And the Bible gives us very clear understanding of it when you look at Hebrews 13:4. And taking in context of everything that we talked about and discussed, the writer of Hebrews says that marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure. You are not keeping your marriage bed pure if you're bringing in pornography. Let's just call it what it is. You're not.
Or if you're even just looking at other women, you could just be sitting. Let's just talk about, somebody sitting at their desk at work. That's married, probably not. Sex life's not so great. They're not communicating as great, and all of a sudden, you notice another individual that's attractive across the way. And the first time it might just be a glance, but then the next time, stay a little bit longer. Then the next time you make sure that you're going to bump into this other person. Then conversations start. Then it might be a lunch. Then it might be a few lunches that might turn into, hey, maybe we should hang out for dinner time. And just with a simple glance of the eyes is how all that started, because you didn't guard your eyes. You let that in, and that's just as subtle as anything.
It is. As
any image, any thought that you don't take captive, that you allow to continue to grow, is like that seed that's buried. And a person thinks, oh, nobody sees me. Nobody knows. But there's a seed that goes in. And everybody knows what happens with seeds. Right. Something grows.
Well, just talking about that, when the Bible says, above all else, guard your heart. Above all else, guard your heart. You have to guard your heart. And what's the entry to your heart? Your eyes, your ears, your touch. Hey, check it out. Your thoughts. What thoughts am I allowing to plant seeds inside of my heart?
Yeah, because they're growing.
Am I fixating on that other individual and how nice they talk to me? Maybe my husband's not been talking so nice to me lately. And this gentleman is more than willing to sprinkle sugar in my ears. And I start to let it ruminate and plant seeds. Or maybe you're that man, like you said, that gets fixated on that beautiful image. And I allow the seeds to get planted. You have to guard your heart. You have to guard your marriage.
Well, and if you've had these hurts and traumas in the past that you haven't been able to find resolve with on your own, with your spouse, seek help. Get help. You can get help and have a healthy sex life in your marriage. Right. Even having gone through some of these difficult things in the past.
To wrap all this up, God created sex. Right? Sex is a gift from God. But it's meant to be only between a husband and a wife in the confines of marriage. That's the borders, the guidelines, and the protection He puts it in. And it's supposed to be healthy, and it's supposed to be enjoyable for both.
And a great picture of that is the Song of Solomon in the Bible. Is a great book. that really dives into that element of healthy sexuality. And if you haven't taken the time to read that because it sounds too poetic, find a study that breaks that down for you, and you're going to definitely see that God is not a boring God when it comes to sex. Like, He made sex to be 100% fun and enjoyable and lasting if you do it within the design that He created it to be experienced in.
So we leave you with this question. Ask yourself, what areas in my marriage do I need to guard against the enemy trying to break in as it comes to sex and sexuality? So guys, we hope you enjoyed the podcast today. We hope it's been helpful. If you did like it, please go check us out at covenantkeeper4life.com. That's covenantkeeper, the number 4life.com. And get out there, guys. Stand for marriage. Stand for God. You're a covenant keeper.